Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode on Monday Positivity Healing Through Regulation. And today, actually, I want to talk about very interesting topic. Like it's one of my favorite topics. Actually, it's called shadow work. And the reason I want to talk about it is because when I think it's an interesting topic. A lot of my clients earlier, when I was providing life coaching, a lot of my clients used to ask about this term, and this term is actually considered, it comes across as very mystical, dramatic, and overly spiritual sometimes. And yes, it is, but it is also deeply psychological, and it is backed by decades of research. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, because many people, when they hear this term shadow work, they feel like they need to do some healing. They need to heal their dark side. Yes, the healing is involved, but the problem is they feel like shadow work means they have to now embrace their shadows. They have to embrace their demons. So if you are someone who was oppressing your anger, you need to embrace it and all of that. And I understand poetry around it is beautiful, but the reality is far more practical. Shadow work is actually about understanding how the brain stores experiences we couldn't fully process. How those experiences shape our reactions and why we keep repeating emotional patterns without meaning to. If we, strip away all the aesthetics and look purely at the science, shadow work is simply this: learning to bring unconscious, automated emotional patterns into conscious awareness so that you can respond to life instead of reacting to it. Now, why does this matter? Because every time you have an intense emotional reaction, be it anger, be it shame, defensiveness, withdrawal, isolation, your brain isn't always responding to the present moment. It is responding to a memory from the past, a template, a survival lesson. And shadow work is the science of breaking those templates so your mind can update itself. If you remember, last year I had recorded one episode where I talked about, updating our, like we update software in the system, in our laptop, in our mobile, desktop, what have you. We also need to update ourselves emotionally. That emotional software that needs updates. And shadow work is the science of updating, yourself by first, breaking the old templates. And honestly, this is one of the most important topics to understand if you want emotional maturity, if you want better relationships, if you want sharper decision making, and because my channel is about nervous system regulation, emotional regulation, inner child healing. If you want to heal your inner child, if you want a calmer nervous system, this is very important. The shadow work is very important. Now, let me help you understand what shadow work actually is. So, the shadow term, actually, shadow work or shadow term, it comes from one of the famous uh, uh, people in history, Carl Jung, right? And I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Some people call him Jung, some people call him Young. I would prefer Carl Jung. And he, I think, gave this term, but modern psychology translates it to something very simple. He gave this term shadow work, I think, or the term shadow. Uh, but according to modern psychology, let's go with that because it's easier to understand. The shadow is the collection of thoughts, it is the collection of memories, impulses, emotions your brain has pushed out of conscious awareness because they once felt unsafe, overwhelming, or socially unacceptable. Do you understand? This is not mystical, this is neurobiological. And now let's go a bit deeper. Let's try to understand it even more. When I say that, it is collection of thoughts, memories, and impulses or emotions that, brain decided to suppress or maybe, push out of conscious awareness. What I mean by that, see, the brain, the way it works is it suppresses overwhelming information. When you were a child and something felt emotionally intense, maybe criticism, chaos at home, being ignored, being shamed, rejection, and many other, uh, events in your life, maybe they gave you, different kinds of feelings. What happened is when you felt that, your brain didn't have the cognitive ability to process it. Okay. Specifically, as a child, when you went through something like that, your brain didn't know how to process it because it didn't have the cognitive ability to do that. So, what it did, it stored the information in the implicit memory system, not the explicit one. So, I hope you understand the term implicit and explicit memory system. Uh, Long back, I also talked about, amygdala, prefrontal cortex, right? All of that. So, implicit and explicit memory system relates to that only. Okay. If you're someone who doesn't know what it means, let me help you understand. Implicit memory is more of automatic responses, emotional, bodily responses. Explicit memory deals with conscious facts and events, right? We have these two major memory systems. And when something intense happened as a child, brain didn't have the cognitive ability, so it stored the information or the data in the implicit memory system, not the explicit one. Okay, which means what? It means you don't remember the event clearly, but you remember the feeling. We say that body keeps the score. If you have read that book by Gabor Mate, it's a gem. Sometimes, your brain forgets something, your brain forgets the event, but your body, because body is associated with feelings, your body remembers. So if the event made you feel, really scared, right? And something similar, like similar to that happens, and maybe it is not dangerous, but if the feelings are the same, body will have the same response, right? And that feeling actually becomes a behavioral reflex. And now, with time, that reflex becomes your adult personality. For example, if you were punished for expressing anger, you become overly calm and avoid conflict. If you were ignored as a child, you become hyper independent or overly accommodating. If you were criticized, you become either a perfectionist or someone who avoids trying anything. And it's not because you consciously chose these traits, it's because your brain built automated emotional shortcuts to keep you safe. Your shadow is simply the parts of you that formed under pressure. And shadow work is the process of accessing these implicit memories through emotional triggers. Every time something triggers you, I told you last time also, it's a golden opportunity. Every trigger presents an opportunity to understand where the wound is still not healed, right? And I'm telling you, you can't think your way into the shadow. You feel your way into the shadow. Whenever you react too strongly, whenever you shut down suddenly, whenever you feel defensive, ashamed, or you get easily irritated or you pull away from people, that emotional spike is the brain opening a file from the past. So, shadow work is noticing the file, slowing the reaction, and decoding what it is connected to. Now, let's also understand why the shadows form. Okay, let's also understand, neurobiology and childhood conditioning. As we talked about two major memory systems, explicit and implicit. Explicit is, where we have conscious facts, events, and all of that. Implicit is more of, automatic response, emotional, bodily feelings. The shadow forms in the implicit memory because childhood experiences are too overwhelming to process verbally. Okay. And if you want to understand it scientifically, um, there are two parts of the brain that we usually discuss. One is prefrontal cortex, which is linked to logical reasoning, and it develops slowly. And if someone has CPTSD or PTSD or trauma, this part actually develops way too slowly in these individuals. And the another part is amygdala, which is related to emotional alarm system. It develops early. In children, it is very active because again it develops early. So the children store experiences as felt states, emotional alarm system in amygdala, not narratives. Narratives will be logical reasoning saved in prefrontal cortex. And this is why you may not, if you if you had an experience in in childhood, you may not remember being criticized, but you still fear being judged because the feeling is still there. You may not remember emotional neglect, but you still panic at the idea of being ignored. You may not remember chaos at home, but you still get triggered by unpredictability. The shadow isn't a memory problem, it's a pattern problem. You developed a pattern. And it isn't about what happened, it's about how your brain learned to survive it. Okay. And how do you understand it? Just pay attention to when the shadow shows up. Now let's understand how the shadow shows up, because this is where we need to recognize, our triggers and our patterns. Because shadow material doesn't come up randomly, it shows up in very predictable ways. The number one trigger is overreactions. When the emotional intensity does not match the situation, is called overreaction. For example, let's say someone gave you a normal feedback, right? But you feel attacked, you feel, defensive, you also start feeling ashamed. So that was just one example. Um, you know, you are emotionally overreaction means emotional intensity that does not match, the situation. Someone gave you a normal feedback and you start feeling attacked, ashamed, defensive even. In that moment, the brain is actually referencing an old memory of criticism. Okay. Another example is people pleasing or conflict avoidance. You may have the tendency to avoid conflict not because you are kind, but because your nervous system associates a disagreement with danger. Like if someone does not agree with me, it is dangerous for me. Okay. So maybe you avoid conflict. Another example is anger and irritability. Usually, usually when someone is really angry or someone is uh, irritated by something, you know it actually shows some kind of unmet need or suppressed emotion or maybe childhood unfairness also, like they did not um, feel like they got a fair treatment in childhood, right? So usually anger and irritability, it masks for uh, it is, often a mask for unmet needs, childhood unfairness, suppressed emotions. And then very common is jealousy or insecurity. Jealousy and insecurity, they are rooted in earlier experiences of unpredictability. Also favoritism. Maybe you saw someone, was favoring someone else more than you. And also maybe there was, unpredictability in certain experiences. And maybe you also experienced emotional inconsistency, right? Another one is shame responses. And this is actually the deepest form of shadow. Shame tells you there is something wrong with me. And this usually comes from high criticism. If you faced high criticism, if there was, perfectionistic parenting, if there was emotional neglect, if you were compared a lot, if your caregivers were inconsistent. Okay, it creates shame. And all shadows lead back to a felt sense of threat. No matter what the shadow, you are feeling some kind of threat. And again, what happens? Your brain is not able to process, but your body reacts first. And then your mind creates a story later, you know? So again, going back to, that example of receiving feedback. Maybe you received a very simple feedback, right? What happens? Your body reacted first because the event, matched something from the past, and body reacts because you are feeling, those emotions. Then your mind creates a story later, and it's a loop. And that story, again generates, those feelings. Okay. And because I talk about, nervous system regulation on this channel, that's, our main purpose. That's the main goal: nervous system regulation, emotional regulation. Now let's understand, the biological connection, the shadow and the nervous system, because we can't talk about shadow work without talking about the nervous system. Shadow reactions are, as I told you, overreacting, right? Shadow reactions are very automatic, very fast, and they are usually out of protectiveness. Okay. Now, these three elements actually are part of amygdala. Because amygdala does what? It spots emotional danger based on old patterns, right? And when that happens, the HPA axis, if you remember, that polyvagal theory, in that episode, you should go back and check that. In that episode, I actually explained it really well, how it all works. So amygdala starts reacting, the HPA axis, it releases stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, and then comes your vagus nerve. I created that also in that specific video. You should go check that one. It's really important. So what happens? Vagus nerve, is the longest nerve in the body. Either fight or flight response is activated, or it shuts you down into freeze, vagal collapse. When you feel triggered, your nervous system is not responding to reality, it is responding to stored emotional data. And this is why shadow work is essentially nervous system work. We can't heal the shadow purely through thinking. We must include the body. And I think this is actually going to be the title of this episode. Uh, you know, healing nervous system regulation through shadow work. I'm going to, use that title. Now, I think we've talked a lot about shadow work, what it is, its impact on nervous system regulation, and all of that. Now, let me help you go through the real process of shadow work step by step. Okay. And again, these are science backed methods used by psychologists, no mysticism. So, the number one step, whenever you start shadow work, number one step is to be aware. Self awareness is very important, as I always say. So, the step number one is to catch the reaction. You don't need to fix anything immediately, just notice. Don't react, just notice. I'm having a strong reaction. Now, once you notice that, once you are, aware, it already shifts brain activity from amygdala to prefrontal cortex. And if you want to be good at it, start meditating. Meditation will change your life. So that's step number one: catch the reaction. And see, again, I'm not using any mysticism or anything. Uh, this is also science backed. Meditation actually helps you, you know, calm down your amygdala, and it improves your prefrontal cortex. It can make decisions. It can make better decisions. It can help you decide in those, moments of reaction. So, step one: every time you feel triggered by something, catch the reaction. Just tell yourself, I'm having a strong reaction. That's it. Step number two: label the state, not the story. Don't go after analyzing the trigger. And this is, one of the mistakes I've seen people, making. Don't analyze the trigger. Try to recognize the state. Okay, we are going after the state, not the story. For example, Just recognize the state. State means this is fear, this is shame, this is abandonment, this is anger. That's it. Because when once you can label it, labeling, you labeled it, it's like, we are providing some logic. Prefrontal cortex is active. It reduces limbic activity by up to 40%. Okay. Step number three, regulate before reflecting. See, you can't do shadow work in a dysregulated state. If you try to do shadow work in a dysregulated state, it will backfire. Regulation methods are used, you know, and then shadow work is done. You have to regulate yourself first, then you have to do the shadow work. So, how would you regulate yourself? Slow breathing, ground yourself through the senses, uh, shake out tension, wash your hands, wash your face. You can also orient to the environment, place a hand on the chest, lengthen your exhales. And once the body calms, the brain becomes curious again. Okay, now brain is ready to listen to you. Now ask the key question. This is where shallow work actually begins. It's like, the warm up. Earlier we did the warm up. Now we'll start with the actual workout, which is shadow workout. Now you need to ask the question, when was the first time I remember feeling this way? Don't run after the situation. Just ask, when was the first time the state, the fear state, anger state, what have you, whatever state it is, just ask yourself, when was the first time I remember feeling this way? Not what caused it today. Just ask, when was the first time I remember feeling this way? When did this emotional pattern begin? And let your mind explore. And sometimes, what happens is that your mind will give you an answer, right? It will take you maybe, 3, 4 years back. Once you reach there, you can ask again, is this the first time I remember feeling this way, or did it happen earlier before that age also? Maybe it will take you a few more years back, you know? And through this whole process, you're searching for a dynamic, you're searching for a tone, a childhood emotional environment. And this is the doorway to implicit memory. You know, if you remember, uh, because I usually I usually talk about amygdala, prefrontal cortex. Those are the terms that I can easily work with. But if you remember that implicit memory is more of like, emotional, explicit memory is more of like conscious facts, right? So when you start doing this, this is a doorway to implicit memory. And now actually, because implicit memory means like the event happened, you felt something in your body, and the next time, something similar or something not so similar maybe happens, but you have the same feeling in the body. So it's like the feeling is not because of that event, it is related to something in the past. And once you start asking, those questions, this is the doorway to implicit memory. Now you're opening the door to implicit memory, to trying to actually understand the cause. Now, step 5 is to identify the old rule. What I mean by that? See, every shadow has an underlying survival rule. Okay. For example, if I disagree, I'll be rejected. If I express anger, I'll be punished. If I need too much, I'll be abandoned. If I'm not perfect, I'll be shamed. If I don't stay quiet, I'll cause conflict. You need to find the rule, because finding the rule is the breakthrough. Okay. Try to find the rule behind your shadow. Very important. Okay, because that's where we are trying to suppress that shadow, because there is a rule attached to it. Once you understand the rule, step number 6 is to update the rule. You are an adult now, you can update it. And this is how the brain literally rewires. If you know the concept of, neuroplasticity, this is how you can literally, rewire your brain. You're telling your nervous system that rule kept me safe earlier, but it's outdated now. We need to update it. For example, if the rule was, if I disagree, um, I'll be rejected. New rule can be, I can disagree and still be loved, still be, accepted. I can have needs and still be supported, because sometimes, you also learn that your needs don't matter. Children learn that early on, right? I can feel anger without losing control. Yes, that's possible. Okay. Because sometimes maybe we feel like why we are taught that anger is not good, right? We feel like, if I express anger, I'll be punished or something bad might happen. Now, the new rule can be I can feel anger, but I don't have to act out of it. It is okay to feel it without losing control. I can express myself safely. Okay. And this is neuroplasticity at work. This is what neuroplasticity is. Okay. And the final step, step 7, is to actually practice it in real situations. Because I'm telling you, and I've been doing, shadow work, inner child healing, and all that for more than 7, 8 years. I'm telling you, when you do these practices, working with prompts, exercises, and all that, it sounds really fancy, but it becomes real when you apply it in everyday interactions. How would you apply it? Set boundaries, say no, speak up where you need to speak up, express honest emotions, slow down instead of reacting. Every repetition weakens the old neural pathway and strengthens the new one. Every time you're acting from a new rule, and the old neural pathway in your brain, it will be weakened. Okay. Now, usually, when we talk about shadow work, people get really happy. Oh, I found something so amazing. My life will change. But let me tell you, shadow work is hard. Okay. There is always, biological resistance. It is uncomfortable at first because it challenges a lot of things. It challenges your old survival strategies because your brain thinks changing this might be dangerous. I can't change. Another resistance is the identity, the identity you've already built. Even the patterns which are unhelpful, they feel familiar, right? Because you've built an identity out of it. And another very common reason, another way the resistance shows up, not a way, but the reason, the emotional tension stored in the body. I told you the body remembers what the mind forgets. The body remembers the feeling. There is a very beautiful quote I remember. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it. It goes something like, people can forget what you said to them, but they can never forget how you made them feel. So it's all about feeling. The body remembers what it felt, right? And in one of my podcast episodes, the the I had the privilege to interview a coach, and she said that no trauma is big or small. It just depends on the person, how it lands on the person. Different people process things differently. So maybe something did not cause enough tension in somebody else's body, but it made you feel the worst. Okay. So that emotional tension stored in the body, because the body remembers it, it can be biological resistance. you know Body feels like it's not supposed to feel easy. It's supposed to feel revealing. There has to be overreaction or something. So these are the biological resistance. This is the biological resistance. Now, still, if you do Shadow work, if you don't give up, if you keep up with it, it can actually change your life, which is also proven scientifically. You know, after consistent practice, people who do shadow work, they experience reduced reactivity because the amygdala calms more easily. They have better emotional clarity. You can understand what's happening inside you. You will have fewer projections. You will blame less and you'll be able to, communicate more, and it leads to healthier relationships. And now, because you are no longer controlled by the shame loops, the old patterns, you will have more higher self esteem. You will have higher self esteem. It also helps in nervous system stability. You will be less anxious, less hypervigilant. There'll be fewer shutdowns. Shutdowns meaning like isolation and all. And because you are operating from the present, not the past, you're operating from, new rules, not the outdated ones, you will have better decision making skills. Okay. So if you're someone who watched this episode to this point, if you're still with me, don't give up on shadow work. It's a scientific self awareness method. It's not mystical, it's not dark or dramatic. It is a biological, psychological, and emotional process of becoming conscious of your patterns, understanding where they come from, updating them so you can live with clarity instead of survival. And it's not about finding what's wrong with you, it's about understanding what once kept you safe and evolving beyond it. And also understand that if you are doing the shadow work, it doesn't mean that you only have shadows, nobody else does. Everybody has a shadow, but not everyone has the courage to meet it. But those who do, they gain the freedom to rewrite how they think, how they feel, and how they respond.